بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam received the very first revelation, and the ayat of the revelation we discussed last week, and in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the importance of ilm, importance of knowledge. Now this wahi and this revelation was the very first revelation Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam revealed, in the sense that this was the very first ayat of the Quran which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received. And it was at this time that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was blessed with prophethood. Now wahi would come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam over the course of the 23 years. And verses of the Quran would be revealed at different times, different portions, sometimes less, sometimes more. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would receive this revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as wahi. But there were also other types of wahi which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received. And this wahi which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam received, Allama ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala has mentioned different types. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also mentioned regarding wahi in the Quran. And Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah ta'ala, from this particular verse of the Quran, he mentions that there are three categories of wahi which have other types within them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that وَمَا كَانَ لِبَشَرٍ أَن يُكَلِّمَهُ اللَّهُ. An individual, a human being, cannot speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same way me and you are speaking at this time. An individual can't speak to Allah in that way. A person cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person cannot directly speak face to face with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This will happen inshallah when an individual goes in the hereafter, in the Jannah, where he will be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in this world, an individual cannot directly speak face to face with Allah, whether it is a Nabi, whether it is not a Nabi. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that there are three ways. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَمَا كَانَ لِبَشَرٍ أَن يُكَلِّمَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا وَحْيًا. One way is wahi. إِلَّا وَحْيًا يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ أَوْ يُرْسِلَ إِلَيْهِ رَسُولًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then further states that the second way is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a Rasul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a messenger, a medium, which then gives this message of Allah to this particular individual. أو من وراء حجاب. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the third thing is that He speaks to Allah but behind the veil. So these are the main three categories of wahi. One is that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says wahyan. The second one which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says min wara'i hijab. And the third one which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is yursila rasulan. So these three categories, wahi, behind the veil, and the third one is that a messenger comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now wahi in reality means an indication to somebody which is hidden away, which others cannot see. Okay, so that is what wahi means. So in this category of wahi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would converse and would send messages to the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam through dreams. As we previously read as well, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get dreams prior to prophethood. So they wouldn't be classified as wahi because he wasn't a prophet. But even after getting prophethood, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get dreams from Allah, which would be a wahi and a message from Allah. For example, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw in his dream that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is performing the tawaf of Baytullah. So he took it as a message from Allah that I need to go to Makkah Mukarramah and perform the tawaf. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was put under a spell and an individual done some magic, black magic upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam became very disturbed at this, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted a cure and he didn't know what to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a dream that this is where the magic is, this is what you need to do. So this was a wahi through dreams. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, when he was told that he needs to sacrifice his son, how was he told this? Ya bunayya inni ara fil manami anni azbahuk fanzur madha tara. That he saw in a dream that he's called his son and he said, I've seen in a dream that I am slaughtering you, sacrificing you. What is your opinion? What do you think? So this is one way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala converses with his prophets. Another way which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala converses with his prophets, which is also from the category of wahi, meaning a hidden form, a discrete form, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires the Nabi and inspires within his heart a particular thing. And the Nabi knows that this inspiration is divine inspiration direct from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is also a way which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would converse with the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. Sometimes we get the pious also, which get divine inspiration, as you could say. This is called ilham. So there's a difference between ilham and wahi. Obviously that wahi is a part of sharia, whereas ilham is not a part of sharia. Ilham is something which a pious person is inspired with something. He gets a understanding of a particular thing. For example, we understand that, Hazrat Moulana Ilyas Sahib rahmatullahi alayhi was inspired with the effort of tabligh, for example. Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was inspired with the fact that the Quran Kareem should be compiled. So he was inspired from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this is not a wahi because they were not prophets. And when a prophet gets it, this is direct message from Allah and he knows that this is part of Sharia, so this has to be done and has to be carried out and becomes a necessity part of Sharia. So that's one way. The other way which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the other category is min wara'i hijab, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself speaks to the Nabi but behind the veil. Just as Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, when he went and he received his wahi, then obviously he saw a fire in the distance. He was traveling with his family. He says, let me go to this fire, let me see. So as soon as Musa alayhi salatu wasalam came there, then he heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak to him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him that فَاقْلَعْنَا عَلَيْكَ إِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ تُوَى وَأَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى إِنَّنِي أَنَا اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدْنِي وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conversed with him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam replied to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, in my hand is this particular, what is in my hand? In my hand is a staff with which I do X, Y and Z. So direct talking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, direct speech with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but behind the veil. He cannot see Allah, but he is directly speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is another form of wahi which the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam would receive. Another form of wahi is that the angel would come with a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the speech of Allah subhanahu, and the Quran was revealed in this particular way. In the first three categories of wahi, that wasn't the way Quran was revealed. So there were messages which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would receive. Obviously the speaking to Allah Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did at the time of Mi'raj, but the other Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would receive other messages. Quran would not be received in this particular way. The way of Quran that would be received, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once asked that كيف يأتيك الوحي? Ya Rasulullah, how does wahi come to you? How do you receive wahi? What is the manner in which you receive wahi? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied that أحيانا يأتيني مثل سلسلة الجرس, that sometimes wahi comes to me similar to the ringing of a bell. And that is all Rasulullah ﷺ said in terms of what it's like. And then he says, وَهُوَ أَشَدُّهُ عَلَيَّ, this is the most difficult method and medium of wahi. This is the most difficult of wahi. And Rasulullah ﷺ would receive the Quran in this particular way. So Rasulullah ﷺ says, like a ringing of a bell. Now what does that mean, like a ringing of a bell? So ulama have gone into different interpretations of this. Rasulullah ﷺ himself didn't say anything and didn't explain in what manner it was and what's the similarity between this wahi and the actual ringing of the bell. But the ulama have said that it is the fact that when you have a bell ringing, okay, we must have heard bells ringing sometimes when weddings take place in churches and sometimes on certain special days in the church, then we hear the bell ringing. So it's just a constant ring. Number one, it's constant ringing. And number two, you can't, when you, like somewhere here, you can't actually point in which direction the bell is ringing and which direction the sound is coming from, because it's coming from everywhere. So in this way, in the same manner, the ulama state that when this wahi would come, the Quran Kareem would be revealed upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it would be continuous. It would be continuous. The ayat would come and these ayat would be read continuously, non-stop, without any break in between. Straight one after the other, every ayat would be read to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would listen to these ayat. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا جَمْعَهُ وَقُرْآنَهُ فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would firstly at the beginning, when he would receive the verses of the Quran and he had to remember it, then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do like a hifz class student does, like read an ayat. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get the ayat, for example, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would listen and be reading Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq, Iqra bismi rabbikal ladhi khalaq. And Sayyidina Jibreel would be reciting the next ayat. Khalaqal insana. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is listening to the next ayat, reading the first ayat, and then he would be reading both the ayat or the second ayat and listening to the third ayat. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would find it very difficult and he would find it very burdensome. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تحرك لسانك لتعجل به. Don't worry about you reading the Quran and trying to memorize it when Jibreel comes with it. Rather just listen to it. إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا جَمْعَهُ وَقُرْآنَ. It is our responsibility to make you memorize this Quran. We will put this Quran into your heart. All you need to do is فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَ. When we are reciting the verses of the Quran to you, you just follow them. As soon as you will listen to the ayat, you will remember this ayat and you'll never forget it. And that was what would happen. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would hear the ayat and thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would know the ayat immediately. So this was the way the way the Quran was revealed, the second type, where the misl salsalatil jaras. So the Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam would come down with the verses of the Quran, but the verses of the Quran, when they would be related to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would be like the ringing of a bell, a constant, uninterrupted wahi and revelation. And the verses Rasulullah, it would be like 3D surround sound, all the way around, and there's no one direction from where the voice is coming from. So that was one way. Another way of an angel coming down. So this is one way Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam would come. Sometimes Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam would come in human form to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would come as a human. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would speak directly to Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. Other people will not be able to see him, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be able to see Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, and he would speak directly to Jibreel alayhi salam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, Ya Rasulullah, X, Y and Z. And generally, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam would come in the form of a sahabi called Dihya al-Kalbi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Sayyidina Dihya al-Kalbi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was a very close sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was extremely handsome. He was extremely handsome. So that is why Jibreel alayhi salatu wassalam would come in the form of Dihya al-Kalbi radiyallahu ta'ala anhu on most occasions. Sometimes he would come in an appearance of somebody else as well. Once the famous riwayah of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, where he says that we were all sitting with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam when somebody comes into the masjid fully dressed in white, jet black hair, no signs of fatigue upon this individual, and he walks right through the congregation, comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and sits knee to knee with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asks Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, what is Islam? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, this is what Islam is. And he says, yes, you are correct. So everybody's sitting there saying, who is this person? He's asking Rasulullah, and then he's saying to Rasulullah, yeah, you said correct. Then he says, what is Iman? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is what Iman is. And then that person says, yeah, you are correct, that's right. Then he says, what is Ihsan? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is what Ihsan is. So he says, yeah, that's correct as well. Then he says, when is Qiyamah? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, I don't know, and you're asking me, you don't know as well. None of us know. None of us know more. So he says, that's correct as well. But do you know any signs of the day of Qiyamah? So he says, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, yes, I know certain signs of Qiyamah. And he mentions X, Y, Z, these are the signs of Qiyamah. Then this person says, okay, that's fine. Then he gets up and he goes away. And the Sahaba says, what was all that about? What happened there? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do you know who that was? That was Jibreel. That was Jibreel. So everybody could see Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, but they didn't know that it was Jibreel. So the Rasulullah said, that was Jibreel. He came so that he teaches you your deen. He asked me so that I answer in front of you so that you people can learn. He knew, I knew, but it was for your benefit that he asked these questions. So this was another way that the wahi would come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another way which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would get wahi is he would see the angel in his actual form. He would see Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam in his actual form, and this only happened on a few occasions. Once on the occasion of Mi'raj, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam in his actual form, and another time was just after the very first wahi, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't receiving anything. He wasn't receiving any wahi, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very confused, very disturbed that where is this wahi gone? Why is my connection with Allah disappeared for? Has Allah become displeased with me, etc. And then all of a sudden he hears somebody call out to him. So he looks around, he can't see anybody, then he looks up, and then he sees there that there's a chair there in the middle of the sky. Jibreel is on it in his actual form with his wings open, and he says that it was so huge that he filled the entire horizon from east to west. And Rasulullah saw him, and Rasulullah couldn't comprehend it, and Rasulullah was overwhelmed and he fell unconscious. And then he returned home. So that is another way where the way a wahi would come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these were the different ways that wahi and revelation would come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would then learn this wahi and explain. And wahi was, what is wahi? Wahi is the medium which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks with His creation, and this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses a certain individual who is then called a prophet, and through them Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us, because obviously not everybody can speak to Allah. So Allah chooses an individual, and through that individual, his medium, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down wahi and revelation and speaks to the general masses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand the wahi, and the main wahi is none other than the Quran Kareem, and the other type of wahi is the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was also wahi, because whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say would be in light of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have told him. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَنْتِكُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا wahyun yuha. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whatever he utters, whatever he says, he does not say out of his own whims and desires. Everything he utters and he says is nothing but a wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is a wahi. But obviously the Quran wahi is the actual word and of Allah, the words of Allah. That is why a person, when he recites them, he gets reward for them as well. And that is the actual word of Allah. Whereas the other wahi, which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ahadith, they were Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's words in light of the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So obviously there's no reward in actually reading, like the way we read Quran, you get 10 rewards for every single letter. Obviously when we read a hadith, we don't get 10 rewards for every single letter, because it's not actual words of Allah, but there are a lot of reward in studying the ahadith, because that is in reality the very first tafsir of the Quran Kareem. And this, as I mentioned previously, is the foundation of our deen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam despite him being an ummi. He was an ummi, meaning Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not educated. Allah directly educated Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have any formal education. So some people, there was once a person who says that, a person said to and somebody else, look at you, you're such a ignorant person, you don't know how to read, you don't know how to write. You understand? Learn something. So he says, my Nabi was also an ummi. My Nabi was also an ummi. So the person says, Arey, Biwakuf, your Nabi was an ummi, but this was a mu'jiza bestowed to him by Allah. It's not something good to be an ignorant person or an uneducated person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made in the Nabi ummi because Allah himself educated Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for us as ummah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would constantly encourage studying. At the time, the people were known as, they didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write, but as we see in the Seerah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them, meaning encouraged them and told them that go and learn how to read, go and learn how to write. And many people, by the time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left this world, there was an entire community of Sahaba who knew how to read and how to write, not only in Arabic, but even different languages. Sayyidina Zayd radiyallahu ta'ala, if I recall correctly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him, and I'll finish on this. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Zayd, come here. And he came and he said that, look, I get these letters written in Hebrew, and obviously I don't know how to read Hebrew, and none of us, I don't know how to read any language, but none of us know how to read Hebrew. So when we get these letters, then we have to call the Jews of Medina Munawwara to tell us to translate these particular words. But I don't trust them. That sometimes they may change the translation. Sometimes they may hide something which is in the content of that letter. So I don't know what to do. So will you learn the language? Will you learn Hebrew? So he says, yeah, no problem, I'll learn it. And Sayyidina Zayd radiyallahu anhu says, in 15 days, I learned the language and I would read, translate for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whatever would come, I would be able to read and translate, and whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tell me, I would be able to translate in Hebrew, and I would be able to send off the letter. In 15 days. An hour, 15 years go past, but we don't have a chance to learn the Arabic language. Something where we can take away. Let us try to learn the language of the Quran. Let us try to learn the language of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to directly understand the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala khayr khalq Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa, salamun ala al-mursalin. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد وانزله مقعد المقرب عند اللهم رب هذه الدعوه القامه والصلاه النافعه صل على محمد ووضع عني رضا الله رزقته بعده وابدا اللهم صل على محمد عبده ورسوله وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد وارحم محمد وعلى محمد كما صليت وباركت ورحمت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وأزواجه وذريته كما صليت على آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أزواجه وذريته كما صليت على آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وعلى أزواجه وذريته كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد النبي وأزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وذريته وآل بيته كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وترحم على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما ترحمت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ترحم على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما ترحمت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم تحنن على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما تحننت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم سلم على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما سلمت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم على محمد وعلى آل محمد وارحم محمد وعلى محمد كما صليت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد عبده ورسولك كما صليت على آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وبارك على محمد النبي الأمي كما باركت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد عبده ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وصلاة تكون لك رضا وله جزاء ولحقه أداء وعاطه الوسيلة والفضيلة والمقام المحمود الذي وعدت وجزينا ما هو أهل وجزي أفضل ما جازيت النبي عن قومه ورسول أمته وصل على جميع إخوانه من النبيين والصالحين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى كما صليت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل علينا معهم. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى أهل بيته كما باركت على إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك علينا معهم صلوات الله وصلوات المؤمنين على محمد النبي الأمي. اللهم اجعل صلواتك ورحمتك وبركاتك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما جعلت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وصلى الله على النبي الأمي. التحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات والسلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. التحيات الطيبات والصلوات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. التحيات لله الطيبات والصلوات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. التحيات المباركات والصلوات الطيبات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد عبده ورسوله. بسم الله بالله. تحيات الله والصلوات والطيبات. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمد عبده ورسوله. أسأل الله الجنة وأعوذ بالله من النار. تحيات الله الزاكيات الله الطيبات الصلوات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. بسم الله بالله. خير اسماء التحيات الطيبات الصلوات لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أرسل بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا وأن الساعة آتية لا ريب فيها. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. اللهم اغفر لي واهدني. التحيات الطيبات والصلوات الملك لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله. التحيات لله الصلوات لله الزاكيات لله. السلام على النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. شهدت أن لا إله إلا الله شهدت أن محمد رسول الله. التحيات الطيبات الصلوات الزاكيات لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمد عبده ورسوله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. التحيات الطيبات الصلوات الطيبات الزاكيات لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين التحيات الصلوات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين التحيات لله الصلوات الطيبات. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. التحيات المباركات والصلوات الطيبات لله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. بسم الله والسلام على رسول الله. يا رب صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك. لا استغفر الله. أيوة الله نشكر